everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Paris and I'm the author of the Magi trilogy. Book 1 I have with me right here, The Magi, and Book 2, Illusion of Fear, are available now. Book 3, Belle Destine, we're kind of nearing in on the 2-month mark for Countdown to release. Not quite there, but almost. Enough to be excited. In today's video, I want to talk to you guys about my favorite, it's not really a literary element, but it's kind of a creative writing tool, I think is the best way to say it. And a lot of you guys, if you know me, you probably know what I'm about to say. We're talking about foreshadowing. I just love foreshadowing in general in a very broad sense. I love reading books that utilize foreshadowing, which, I mean, any fiction book probably does use it to some degree, so I like seeing it in action, and then I also like writing it. So in today's video, I want to share with you guys some tips on how I foreshadow, and in my opinion, when the best time to foreshadow is. But first, let's give a little bit of a background on exactly what foreshadowing is and how you use it. Foreshadowing is basically when you drop hints throughout the story about an event that's going to occur. So an example of that could be just giving your readers kind of an ominous feeling about something, and then, an ambush happens, something goes wrong. It could be maybe a phrase that doesn't have much meaning in the moment, but later in the series you kind of realize, hold on, that was our first hint about the prophecy or about whatever it is that occurred. It's giving your readers and your characters a little bit of a heads up. However, as I'll talk more later, you might not notice it right away. Foreshadowing takes a lot of planning ahead for a lot of different reasons, but I think one of the biggest and most straightforward reasons is just you can't really foreshadow an event that you don't know is going to happen. If you aren't aware or if you're not planning ahead that there's going to be a battle in the book, you can't really foreshadow events in the battle. Maybe you can foreshadow that something big is going to happen. Maybe you know ahead of time that something big is going to happen, but the actual event, an actual specific scenario, if you're trying to foreshadow that somebody's going to get snatched up, maybe you should know what that plan is. Maybe you should know who's the one that's going to, be taking them away. How are they going to find the person? Where are they going to be? You need at least a broad sense of it because it takes some planning ahead to be able to foreshadow it. Like I said, you can't really foreshadow something that you don't know is going to happen. Another important aspect of foreshadowing that should be kept in mind when you're utilizing it is there is a fine line between foreshadowing and spoiling a big event. Now, if you're purposely trying to give your readers a bit of a spoiler ahead of time, go for it. That is something a little bit different. If you're specifically foreshadowing is more of a hint. It's hinting to your readers what's to come. It's giving them a little bit of a heads up they might not notice right away. Think of it more so as a trail of breadcrumbs. Not only that with it, but foreshadowing is an element of the story that is something your readers might not notice right away, and that is totally fine. That is ultimately, I think, the best examples of foreshadowing are when your readers reread the book. They're going to notice it when they read chapter 2 for the second time. That's when they're going to notice you foreshadowed an event in chapter 15. Because when they first read it, they don't know what's going to happen. They don't have a hint of what's to come. When they reread the book, they know what's going to happen, and when it's going to happen, that's when they're going to start catching all of these little details. It's almost in some ways a way to give your readers something new when they reread the exact same story. Foreshadowing is a fun element to use for the first draft or the first time people read it, but it's also fun because it draws your readers back in and it gives them something new every reread. When is the best time for you as the writer to add foreshadowing to the story? My answer to this might seem a little bit backwards, but bear with me because it makes it a lot of fun for you as the writer. I think the best time to add foreshadowing to your story is actually when you're editing. It's not the first draft. The first draft of the story, you can absolutely foreshadow in it. I do it all the time. I'm sure many other writers do. I think most of us do. We add foreshadowing when we're first drafting. But the reality is the first draft is not the finished product. You might realize when you're on draft 3 or 4 that you actually need to add an additional scene to fix a plot hole. Or maybe you have to cut out a big event. Maybe the event you foreshadowed just doesn't work and you need to rewrite it. Little things are going to change. You might discover a plot hole. Maybe your outline just doesn't look like the finished product. Whatever it is, when you're foreshadowing the first time around, you might not necessarily be foreshadowing the final details. So you can keep your original foreshadowing, but the best time to add the bulk of it, to add the really, juicy foreshadowing bits, is at the end. When you're on draft 3 or 4, you have a more stabilized product. You are closer to what the final version of the book is going to look like. So it's going to be easier for you to realize, I can foreshadow this event now, so how do I do that? Where do I do that? Or maybe you find a spot where you're like, I can add an additional line here and I can add some more foreshadowing. Or if I change, I know this is something I do in the Magi a lot, if I were to change a word from, just because it's related to their powers in this example, if I were to change, the color blue is being referenced, if I change it to reference more so water specifically, if I can find something that maybe instead of talking about just water in a broad sense, I change it to the word flood, or maybe with Miles, he has a lot of lightning in his eyes, so maybe I'm foreshadowing some event and I use an additional kind of, instead of using the word sparked, I use crackle, something like that, switching out little words. It's very small details, but in a broad sense, when your readers are rereading the book, that's when they're gonna catch it. That's when they're gonna be like, wait a minute. Part of the fun of foreshadowing is it can look like a lot of different things. It can look like switching out just one word. It can look like adding kind of an inside joke from later in the book, earlier in the book. It can look like switching out scenes. It can look like adding a scene. It can look like maybe you take something away. Maybe you leave something hanging, an empty hole. Whatever it is, foreshadowing doesn't have a right or wrong way to it. And sometimes when you are foreshadowing, you want your readers to be able to guess. Sometimes foreshadowing is really something that you want to add for that first read through. It's something that you want to give them a hint that your characters don't have. Because another fun aspect of foreshadowing is while maybe if you're using a specific event that occurs, if you are using some sort of ominous sign, maybe your actual characters are going to pick up like, okay, I have a bad feeling about this, something might not be going to plan. But for the most part, your foreshadowing is more so for your readers than your characters. So in some examples, it can give your readers a heads up. Your readers can know more than the characters, just like sometimes your characters might know more than the readers. Foreshadowing is a fun little game to play because you can play with the actual balance of the story. You can give your readers a hint that they know what's coming and they're walking into a trap. They know your characters are walking into a trap, but there's nothing they can do about it but sit back and wait. My final note on foreshadowing is that foreshadowing isn't just for one specific book at a time. It certainly can be. If you're writing a standalone novel or even if you're writing a series, you can foreshadow book 2 events in book 2. But part of the fun if you're writing a series is you can foreshadow book 3 events in book 1. You can foreshadow book 3 in book 2 in book 1, so on and so forth. Whatever it is, you can hint. If you're going to do a prequel later, you can maybe add a little bit of a hint in the original story, the original plot line. You can have some sort of reference that wouldn't make sense out of context, but when they go back, your readers, and they read the prequel, that's when it's all going to click. Foreshadowing isn't just one book at a time, only book 1 and book 1, only book 2 and book 2. You can bounce back and forth, you can reference events, you can go backwards, hit forward in time. Whatever order it is, foreshadowing can be used anywhere at any time. And in some cases, if you are writing a longer series, it makes your series look more tied together in a way if you add foreshadowing for future events. If your readers can reread the entire series and catch a book 3 detail in book 1, it makes everything look more, I don't want to say perfected, but it gives it a little bit of a connection. At the same time, you might not have the full plot line out for books 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, and that's totally fine. But chances are from the beginning, you know that book 5 is going to have a big battle scene, so you know that you can foreshadow it in book 2. You know that book 4, somebody is going to have some sort of issue, some sort of difficulty that they're facing that you can foreshadow in book 3, so on and so forth. You might not know the exact details, but you absolutely can foreshadow later books in the earlier books. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it gave you some kind of inspiration for foreshadowing. I hope it gave you a bit of a confidence boost in a way, because if your foreshadowing isn't up to par in the first draft, that's totally fine, because a lot of the fine-tuning, a lot of the more in-depth and more detailed foreshadowing is going to happen later. And that's absolutely okay, because until your book is published, and technically speaking, even after your book is published, because you can republish, you can add more foreshadowing, you can add more details, you can add more of any aspect of the story. You're the writer, you're the author, you can do what you want to do. So thank you for watching this video. If you have any additional comments or questions about foreshadowing, I would love to talk to you guys about that in the comments, or maybe make another video about it, because it really is one of my favorite aspects of writing, is to be able to foreshadow future events, and sometimes events of the past. And while we're talking about foreshadowing, If you want to reread the Magi trilogy, books 1 and 2 before Beldestein comes out, might be a good idea because it might give you a little bit of a hint of what's to come. Whatever time it is, whether it's morning, evening, or night, have a great day.